Hi and welcome back to MDriven. We had this Wednesday night with MDriven, as we usually do every other week, and I forgot to turn on the recording, so it sort of starts abruptly, and to mitigate that and to let you know what we are talking about, I'm going to do a short intro. And what we are about to show is what we call the LiveUpdate functionality that we are experimenting with, and it's sort of hard to explain what it is, so that we wanted to show it in real life instead. Let's see, LiveUpdate. So what LiveUpdates is, it's a model section, can be used as a starting model that holds information how to change the model itself. And the aim for this was to be able to just start a MDriven turnkey application that has been endowed with this capability by applying this model section, and then actually from within the application itself create the new class. This is new, and once you have done that, the application redesigns the outer form so that we have can create a instance of this is new object. Save that. Of course, it doesn't have any attributes, so we could add those. Can have a name, and then the outer form is regenerated, and let's add an attribute, an image, and then we can upload an image. Yeah, so and then we continue with the original video. Thank you. Taking it from here, let's add a attribute for the invoice class, stating it should be a number, and we can store it as a string because that might be an alphanumeric number. Let's say that. And what happened now was that this information was interpreted, and a number attribute was added to the invoice class. So now if we were to go back to the seeker, we would see that there would be a number attribute as well in the seeker, and when we click up the invoice, we can enter a number like number 1 and save that information. But of course we would like a invoice row as well. So if we were to go to add, change or remove class, we would want to create an invoice row. And let's go ahead and perform that action. And now we have a new outer form for invoice row seeker. Of course, that doesn't have any attributes or objects either. So I'm going to have an object for that and add an attribute. Let's call that item. So now we have item there. But if we go back to the invoice and add an association. So what's the target class for the association? Well, the invoice row maybe. And quite few options, but let's state it. It's many. It can be many rows. So the target class is many, and then association pointing to invoice row under the name invoice rows. It says here. So if we were to want to give it another name, we can go about that, just entering it here, and then it would say association pointing to invoice row under the name rows, and the end target name, and back from class invoice row to invoice using the name invoice, and that would be okay, I guess. So I okay that, and the logic adds the association. So now we can actually add, this is the standard autoforms logics. Now we can add new rows to our invoice, and this is like item 1, and head back and add new rows and item 2. And of course I might get the feel for wanting to add an association to a product, or have a, let's say I want an image on each invoice row. Of course, let's add an image to the invoice row, and choosing between the available types, image, right, and the autoform is updated. And if we were to find an image, so this should probably be that would also be done for us. So what I guess you can imagine that we continuously update the model in the background just from the small actions that we make available in this turnkey application. But what happens in the background is also that the model that I started with, of course, if you're a newbie, you wouldn't start with a model from the first place. You would only have this initially. But suppose that you have the model open here behind. It will say that, whoa, the file has changed. Want to reload? Yeah, I want to reload. And what we will discover is that we have the invoice class and the invoice row, and all the attributes and associations that we defined in the in this LiveUpdate application. So yeah, you can pretty much do modeling. It's sort of that we turn this turnkey application into a small, very small model editor, and maybe we can get new users to get a feel for what they are doing by being on the object that they want to change the class for. So if we are on a invoice and you want to associate that to a customer, maybe you can understand that you must have a customer class, and that customer class must have an attribute called name, and customer 1. And if you then want to associate the two, you can add an association to the invoice, and the target class should be customer, and that should be 1, but the customer could have many invoices. So then you could set customer 1 on this invoice. And of course, this one should state that we need to reload. And now we have the customer, we have the invoice, we have the invoice row, and yeah, I see that it did wrong here. It's 1 to 1, but I said 1 too many. So yeah, have nothing more to say about this, but maybe we can have a discussion.
Yeah, so this basically means that if you want to bootstrap a small project with someone, you could do this, and you would get the updates going right away. You could actually do this with an MDriven server in the background and a SQL server, and it will evolve the SQL Server database too. And then you can drop all the LiveUpdate classes if you don't want to use this, if you migrate over to the designer later. Or you can do the opposite. You can have a model already, and you can add the LiveUpdate as a merge module. And then your existing model would all of a sudden have this evolved feature built in.
Correct. And the neat thing is that the logic for providing the basic information for this capability is just these few things. There's a few information holders about the commands that you want to provide. So drop a member, or update an attribute, or update an association and update a class. And then also the view models defined for that. And then there's a little bit of logic to discover this in the turnkey server, that it can act on it and make the necessary changes to the model, and then evolve the model and redeploy it.
We've been talking about the view model and be able to make custom view models also, not only automatic ones. But in both cases, you could also, if you're a smart developer and you would like the customers basically to be able to customize the database a bit for adding in fields and attributes that are per customer, you could actually also have this there and then, but restrict the access to the UI. So if you're a developer, you could add stuff into this LiveUpdate class and make your application change while it's running.
But I think its main purpose is for junior developers, that we want to learn how to understand modeling and see the effects. And if they could just be in the application, just like you're in Excel, just are in Excel, and then you both do definition and execution to do the calculations. So maybe this could be a way forward to avoid introducing all the complexities available in the MDriven designer until there's a need from this developer. They want to do something advanced and slightly out of what the capabilities are for this very simple case. So what we want to reach is an environment where you just get this environment and you can do your thing and do your application and think about information and relations. But then you, of course, hit some kind of ceiling or wall that, well, I can't go any further this way. And then you're more motivated to manage the complexity of full UML.
I wonder if the goal is to try to get the intimidated or the less experienced programmer who maybe isn't well versed in UML to engage the tool. My instinct would be to, and I don't know how realistic it is, but to have wizards that say, that walk a user through the type of structure they want to build, and then plop out all the UML and et cetera that they need to, okay, I want to make an invoice. Okay, so let's, if we had a wizard that said, okay, what kind of lines, who's purchasing, how, and walk through it. Granted, it's probably a big tool to build, but if if you had something like that, the trick with software development is everything's a prototype, right? And so as developers, we become frozen in our ability to move forward because we forget that. And we don't want to take a step because we think that we're locking ourselves into something. So if we can teach a novice MDriven user that we're prototyping, but we're prototyping to further approximate the right solution, and it's an iterative, additive process as opposed to, a total shot in the dark. That's useful. But in my opinion, wizards are really powerful for that kind of thing.
Yeah, but it would need to be sort of a script-driven wizard where we can provide the scripts from outside, because there are so many use cases that you want to address, and it's non-static, so you would be able to. And our first stab at wizardry is this thing we call start. So it starts with asking, what do you want to do? Define information or create diagrams or define views and actions, and or do you want to merge in a complete model? So if you want to define information, you get this really downscaled UIs to work on. So guess you want to create a new class, and then you call that something, and the text here updates to want to add attributes to that. But then we are already in a complex environment where you have to think ahead on how is this going to be used, and where is the information actually shown, and how to interact with it.
I have some feedback. I think this is a good step forward, moving all the MDriven design to the web, and then you can have it on any platform. You can have a local web server for the designer, and just add functionality. This is maybe the MVP is more like for simple applications or the target group with so you said junior developers or something like that. So I think this is a good step, moving from and remove the MDriven design as it is today, because I think that's a big threshold to start using MDriven.
Emily, can I ask you, I think you are the youngest here, so you might still remember, because every time I try to talk to someone who is not into this, thinking that we all are now with UML and classes, they have a real difficulty separating instances from definition.
Yeah, I think
how did it click for you that things can be a description of reality and the reality itself?
That's such a hard question. When did it click? I mean, it went over time, of course, to slowly understand what was what and what is the description and what is the data. Like that could also be hard in the beginning. What's information that I save here, and what is the description of how to save the information?
Exactly. That's one of the things that we try to add in there. Do you think this will help?
I think it will help, but also if we here, like in this new, what did you call it, like auto update?
LiveUpdate.
Yeah, LiveUpdate. If there was I don't know, color-coded something like this is the description, and this is because in this live update you can add the description, but also data into. So like separate those.
Those actions should be better separated than just a
Because even if you have a hard time like differentiate those in the beginning, you would not want it to be hot, like one big mess. You want to have it separated so you can learn what is how you should separate them in your head later on when you learn more. So maybe show it like this is separate from the data that you're putting in, and this is description. I don't know how, but.
And also, I think we will to make this fly even as a junior tool. We would need some way to update views to move away from the auto forms that shows all the information and shows it in sort of a alphabetical order, etc. You would want to move things around and also add sort of derivations in the view that this is the sum of all these items, etc.
Well, I think this is a very good point, that you need to separate the two concepts. If it's the same UI, it's not with color or maybe required to have a different browser so you understand what's design, what's the application. Because now it's trying to be very confusing. I know a lot of competitive apps do it like this, have this design tool in the same tool as.
We have talked about, like adding a plus button at the end of the table. So you could kind of click the plus button and that would add an attribute, for example. So there are many ways to go about this. But can I go back again and ask Daniel, Damien, Derek, and that I don't know that well, have you been able to, have you taught design or development or this thing? How do you get people to understand the definition of data and what the class is compared to an instance?
You're not going to like my answer, but in classic philosophy, you have the concept of Platonic forms. And Plato taught that the world was comprised of basically what we're talking about, instances of things and the definition of things. He talks about the virtue of a knife, and the more virtuous the knife is, the better it is at doing what it's supposed to do, in this case, cutting, right? And so it's ancient Greek, but he differentiates in the world the concept of something versus instance of something. And I think that's what's necessary in understanding object-oriented programming, is to understand the difference between the form versus the actual. But I don't know that I know how to teach it. That's just what I fall back on.
Yes. So it's extremely natural, and we all do the separation all the time as we speak and as we think. But at the same time, it's somewhat hard to introduce it to someone to do it formally. They can do it intuitively, but not formally. So
he says that everything has two births. There's the concept that is born, and then the actual, right? A house has a design in mind before it is constructed. Typically, today, it's formal with blueprints and this, that, the next thing. But even if you were to, as a little kid, go to your bucket of Legos to build something, you have an idea in mind before you create an instance of it. And those two aren't the same, but it has to have I can't remember, but there's a term he uses for like the first birth of something and then the second. But again, it's getting awfully academic and weird for probably a junior programmer. I don't know.
So the other approach, and the one we try to take now, is to don't make a big fuss over it. Just a matter of fact, this is how it works, and just start. And then this kind of approach where this is even more so, don't make a fuss, just start, just add the attribute if you need an attribute, just add an association if you need an association. And then you can take the fuss later to see what was it that I actually did, what was the consequences. I don't know, but it's worth to research if this will be more approachable than our previous attempts in getting popular.
I think it's interesting to, if this comes along a little bit, you could say we're borrowing from the Excel sheet or from Airtable, which is basically something like this. It's more document and more data oriented than it's design oriented. So it's like you design by doing, but unintentionally. Then one thing that I was just curious about, Hans, is if you could add like that you could easily pop up like an auto-generated model, because then maybe you'll get the design feedback. It's like if you start building a house brick by brick, and you see that while you do that, the system kind of creates the blueprint.
Yeah. So that would be an interesting development of this too. But
we invested a lot of time in auto-generating understandable UML diagrams. Maybe if you could click up that from within the web browser, basically you could see what you ended up with.
I think the fear from my perspective of that kind of approach is it could get very stringy because it's been designed with forethought. It's just kind of built upon as you go. It might be good as a learning platform perhaps, but on the other end, you could end up with something which is a little impractical.
Yeah.
Definitely.
A mess, basically.
What you need people to understand is data normalization, right? That's the danger of just allowing people to build stuff if they're not normalizing as they go. I don't know that's just something you have to learn.
And learning is done by experience. It's you have to have a hands-on, but this would become very much hands-on. And as you do as I did here, discover that maybe I shouldn't put if this image is the image of the product that's being sold, maybe I shouldn't put that on each invoice row. Maybe I should have an association to the product instead. Then you have learned something, and then it's really easy, even in this environment, to just drop it and introduce the product class and associate to that, and put the image there, and then you have learned that, oh, that's good, because then I only need to maintain the image one time instead of multiple.
One question you're all, even Emily is an old developer soon, right? So that said, could this tool be used by old developers when you meet do you meet any new areas that you are grabbing onto? We kind of think that this could also be beneficial if seasoned developers or medium aged developers meet new customers. If you're a consultant, for example, and you want to make a prototype, and maybe this is something that they can relate to much easier when you work with them. Do you meet any new customers?
Well, I know we have over the years, and simple UML diagram seems to be fairly approachable on a intuitive level if you can explain things as you go about and say things like we have one customer here and a relation to a bunch of invoices and those things. It's worked reasonably well to pick up ideas and get things a bit structured even if you have non-developers around the table. Then of course they lose track when it gets too involved, but the basic concepts of a one-to-many and those things seems fairly approachable by, shall we say, common middle managers if they're coached a bit.
I completely agree with that. I mean, from my perspective, a lot of the people I do interact with are generally engineers, and they do have often a more visual sense of how models are put together, and so the inherent visualness of those kinds of diagrams, I think, lends itself to easier consumption than something more sort of formalized in this form.
One of the thoughts I had a few weeks ago, I was working in the designer, was I wonder, it seems to me it'd be really hard to build object-oriented systems without UML. I haven't tried that in a very long time, but UML is such a powerful visual tool. I almost wonder, how do you do it without it? I don't know the answer to that, but I couldn't.
Slowly and painfully.
You heard about document databases like MongoDB and GraphQL and those kind of persistent mechanisms?
Yeah, but that's another document databases are almost always perspectives already. So that's like storing the view models and the data from the view models. And then you get the redundancy in the different perspectives.
Absolutely.
So, but the problem with the coding without a high-level description like UML is that you end up with the same description produced multiple times. You need it to describe things in memory, you need it to describe things on screen, you need it to describe things in database, and you need it to describe things in transport. And of course, that's, well, to say the least, expensive. And also it builds a lot of resistance to change. Because if you have copied your idea into 15 places, then you better stick with it.
One of the things I think really works to your advantage here is your paradigm of gist, modernity, and fashion, because we're talking about gist, and thankfully gist doesn't move very fast, right? So what you're trying to do is onboard someone into the world of understanding their gist. Once they have some victories there, then they're going to find that they have a solid platform to stand on.
Yeah, good point. Cool. But we have gotten a few pointers here. Good to hear your feedback and your thoughts about these things. And this is in no way our new approach to development, because just like the things that we have had problem with, and everyone has had problem with the high-level platforms, is there's a real necessity to separate design from execution, and many tools fail to do that. Like Excel, you can do a lot of information management in Excel, but as it doesn't separate the definition from the execution of it, it's never production quality because someone can change something. But at the same time, we want to get that feel that it should be just as easy as to starting Excel to do a few calculations. It should be just as easy to start MDriven, some tool in MDriven to draw up your thoughts and get the results that you're looking for that you can't easily do in your head.
May I point out one thing there? You spontaneously said, grow up your thoughts. And yeah, as has already been mentioned, I think the visual aspect here is quite crucial for the types of people this product is for. This kind of wizard here where you enter various names and might be a good tool to add individual classes and associations, but I think visual tools are the lowest threshold if you're going to present something to a developer-oriented person who's not on board with MDriven yet. And funnily enough, I think pretty colors may help too. As silly as it may seem, I've made reports look better from a customer standpoint by adding some purely cosmetic colors. They looked prettier, so they thought they were easier to understand. Silly but true.
Yeah. So that's the fashion part of everything, and we can't forget that in the tools we're building as well, because it's equally important in the tools as in the result, of course. The fashion is what lures someone to have an interest in the first place.
Can I ask? I'm sorry, I need to leave a little bit early today, and it's 15 minutes still here. But we are talking a lot about junior developers today, right? And because we have experienced that it's very, very difficult to target a product to senior developers. They really don't like to change their toolbox. So you're oddities because you're working in this space. But so
MDriven is my toolbox. Purely.
Yeah, but you kind of accepted it for one reason or another in the past. And
yeah, I began with version 0.9 beta and...
Yeah, so were you young when you accepted this, or did you accept it in adulthood, is one of my questions. Like a poll here that Emily can't be part of because she's young. So Damien and Derek, for example, were you young when you started building with Echo, or why did you accept it?
I got forced into learning UML years ago, kind of my second big software job. My first big software job was a terrible nightmare of building code in Visual Basic that was just horrific. And so I learned from that experience all of the bad things that happen with business logic in interface and a lot of that kind of stuff. So when I worked at a different company that was insisting we learn UML, as timing happened, ECO was coming of age, and so it was just the tool of choice, or the obvious tool of choice if you want to build in UML to use ECO. That being said, I do think, senior developers, they have their toolbox, they have their product lines, they have their clients. They don't want to make radical changes. I don't know that I can. That's kind of an unfortunate reality of software development, is I think tool vendors are guilty of making upgrade paths suck. And so, it's kind of funny because it's also true in the automotive repair world that, we're used to having the rug pulled out from underneath us. So we're very cautious about change. And I think that's probably just that's a technology answer period, because it's true with repairing vehicles, it's true with developing software. And so I laugh when you say senior developers don't want to adopt new tools. Try senior mechanics. they're just crotchety, if not worse. But that's kind of the reality of being a technologist, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe as the business has progressed, that we end up with more specializations that we have been accustomed to, that one developer can do HTML and another one can do SQL, but we don't expect to find a guy that can do both. And we sort of have grown accustomed to we need these 5 persons to build an information system.
Damien, sorry, can I keep the thread there? Because I want. So I think your story is exactly the same as mine. If I might summarize yours, that you had experienced the bad parts of not being organized this way, and then you were forced into UML. That's exactly what happened to me. I had experienced all the troubles in years ahead, and then I was forced into UML. So can I ask Derek specifically for the same thing here? Because I think it is, I would like you to tell me.
Somewhat. I think that, as far as age, I was probably, I don't know, late 30s, early 40s when I came across it, and I experimented. It was 100% sort of self-taught in the UML side of it with the early versions of these tools. And I had aspirations for creating more sophisticated models to connect all the data that I use. And there's a lot of engineering applications, but to connect all the data that I use in a more appropriate way for the real world connections of those data. And I've done that previously, just kind of in a way that I tried to make organized, but it was very difficult and time intensive. And so it was a lot of database driven stuff. I tried to formalize my databases as closely as I could to make the connections. And when I stumbled on the UML side of it and putting the pictures together, and then taught myself and understood how that could, how that can dictate your database and then keep the database kind of clean, if you will, by being so closely synchronized with the model itself. It was a wonderful revolution. I just didn't have many people I could pass it along to, or even could appreciate it in the way that I could, because I'm an engineer. I'm not surrounded by other developers, but I have introduced it to a few other developers that I've known.
So you embraced UML from necessity, it wasn't forced upon you, you could say.
No, it wasn't forced upon me. I kind of stumbled on it and grew to love it, really. So it did exactly what I wanted something to do, and that was allow me to get much more sophisticated with my objects and relationships and database management and all the rest of it, without in a well documented and easy to evolve mechanism.
Great.
And what I mean is the word evolve in the bigger sense.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into this some other, but so because I have to leave, I need to jump to Daniel also with the same question.
Yeah, I shall try to keep it brief then. Once upon a time we drew database diagrams, and we got the idea that UML could be the corresponding things for object-oriented systems, which turned out to be true. About that time, a small company called Boldsoft happened to headhunt our best developer, which kind of pissed us off a little bit, but then again, it got us interested in Bold technology, because if he left for them, what great things were they doing? So we started looking into it and began using a very early beta, and I remember having to draw some of the UI icons myself because they weren't done yet and such stuff. And well, we've been using the stuff ever since. Unfortunately, we're only using it on the UML and business objects level, because my colleague who does the user interface stuff is completely uninterested in everything MDriven. So we've done a kind of client-server architecture where I do the server part using UML and stuff, and he uses whatever to do the UI.
Doesn't that take a among us a lot of time, even doing simple UIs. For that's probably not super important, like value stores, etc.
Well, it's very mixed actually. Some of it is just simple forms. Pretty much of it is centered around mapping engines and Google Maps and MapExtreme and things. So
it's very
been a bit
specialized,
domain specific. Yeah. And actually I have two databases under my feet when I work. One database that MDriven has generated for me, and one database from MapExtreme that we have reverse engineered that I can nowadays write and read to under the feet of the other product. Not sure if that's really okay, but it works. So
super interesting to hear these stories from the seasoned developers. I know more about your story, Emily, also, and Henrik, and Bengt, who is maybe still here somewhere. I know their stories too. So, but you know, when I hear these stories, it's like I would like to record you so that we have it on our website or something.
Aren't you recording this right now?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, more because we kind of, the same way that Hans is, we're trying to make it simpler, we're also lacking some of the developer stories from real people who actually uses this idea of framework, not specifically MDriven, but the whole idea of using a visual representation of your code. Because a lot of developers are certain that that is not possible. There's no gain to be had from being a visual representation of your system. We hear that a lot.
That's fantastic, and we are always flabbergasted when we can't explain with enough words why. But that seems to be a hurdle. Of course, it's always hard to turn someone that doesn't want to be turned. So that's
I think the bigger appeal, UML is great and there's lots of positives about the tools we're using. If you ask me, and unfortunately this is probably not something that appeals easily to the newcomer, but the concept of keeping GIST separate from Modernity is something that is maybe a hard lesson to learn in life when you're further down in your career. But you know, from a company's perspective, if you can convince a given company that's investing what they consider a heavy investment in IT that their GIST can be more immortal, that's a very powerful promise that I don't think anyone else does. I've never heard it before. And so, and if you, very American, but there's a business author, his name is Jim Collins, and he wrote a couple of books. One is called Good to Great. And Good to Great talks about how he takes various companies and says,
I've read that book.
Okay, and so he explains what's the difference between a good company and a great company, and he's got various examples. And one of the things he talks about that I think is really powerful is he talks about your BHAG. It's your big, hairy, audacious goal. And your BHAG is supposed to be the intersection of what you can be the best in the world at, what drives your economic engine, and what's the third piece? There's a third piece to it that I can't remember now. But I would think that MDriven would be wise to consider what MDriven's BHAG is. What can MDriven be the best in the world at? And I do think that the concept of separating GIST from Modernity has to play heavily into that formula. It might be the entirety of it, I don't know. But I would think that that's where MDriven lives, others don't.
Yeah, good.
Super interesting. I'll watch the rest of this later when I'm back.
Yeah, we're running out of time, so it's only 5 minutes. Thank you, Lars, for joining, and run to wherever you need to be.
Thank you very much. Thank you especially today when you answered so many questions and told me your stories. So bye for now. See you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, bye. So we can hang around if there's any more questions, or we let everyone off a bit early. So please think about what we should, if you have questions, what you want to see us talk about next sessions coming. I get some input, and that's always welcome to have as a starting point, even if we not always take it face value and exactly as requested. And yeah, I guess we will. I don't have anything more to add at the moment, so if there aren't any questions, I think we call it a night, and see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much once again.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Hans. See you in a couple weeks.
Yeah.